Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
You ever have one of those memories that glows in your head like it's lit from inside? That's what my grandparents' house was for me. A big old colonial with creaky floors, sun-warped window panes, and the kind of porch swing that made summer evenings feel like some kind of small-town movie. My grandfather, Earl, used to call it the anchor, said no matter how far life takes you, you need an anchor to keep from drifting off into nothing. That house was mine. Or at least, that's what I was told for most of my life. I was 17 when they first brought it up. My grandma June sat me down in the living room, smelled like her perfume and black coffee, and told me that someday the house would be mine. Not your sister's, she said, as gentle as she could but firm in her way. She's different. You're the one who understands the bones of this place. And she was right. I helped fix the fence after that winter storm in 2006. I was the one who repainted the shutters when Grandpa's back went bad. My sister Lindsay? She was already off chasing God knows what in Las Vegas, claiming she was gonna be a makeup artist for celebrities. She came back 3 times in 6 years, always broke, always begging. When they passed, first June, then Earl 2 years later, the will said exactly what I'd been told. House goes to me. Not both of us. Just me. My parents even seemed to accept that. At the funeral, Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "They were proud of you. They knew what they were doing." And I believed him. I should have known better. Life got busy. I moved to Denver for work. Got married. Got divorced. Worked construction. Saved up. I didn't plan to move into the house right away, but it was there, my anchor. I was 37 when I decided to go back. Thought maybe it was time to settle down a bit, fix the place up right, start fresh. I took a week off work, rented a car, and drove down to the old town expecting to find the house quiet, dusty maybe, just waiting for me. What I found was a for sale sign in the front yard. I thought it was a mistake at first, like maybe a neighbor was selling, or I had the wrong address. But there it was, my grandparents' house, pale yellow paint peeling around the windows, porch swing still hanging. And a big-ass real estate sign, with a number and a name I didn't recognize. I called my mom right there on the sidewalk. I remember the sound of the cicadas whining in the heat, and her voice on the other end, just a little too calm. I asked her, what the hell is going on? Why is Grandma and Grandpa's house up for sale? She paused for just a beat too long. Honey, we thought you knew, she said. My skin went cold. I stood there staring at the house, heart thudding like I'd just been slapped. She started explaining, her voice too sweet, too careful. There were circumstances. Your father and I had to make some tough choices. We didn't want to burden you. I didn't even hear the next few things she said. My ears were buzzing and all I could think was, how the hell do you sell someone's house without telling them? I said, the will was clear. The house was mine. She gave me that same tone she used when I was 10 and left my bike in the driveway, like I was being dramatic. Things change, she said. Lindsay needed help. Real help. I swear to God, my knees almost buckled right there in the driveway. Lindsay. Of course. I should have known. I got back in the car, didn't even go inside, just sat there breathing through the panic, trying not to put my fist through the steering wheel. Later that night, I called a friend who worked at a title company, asked him to look into it. Told him I didn't care what it cost. I wanted the paperwork. Every signature, every date, every dirty little detail. 3 days later, he sent me a copy of the property transfer. The house had been sold 5 years ago, not long after my grandfather passed. And it didn't go to some stranger. It went to a company called Westridge Holdings. I thought, okay, maybe a developer bought it. But then I looked a little closer. The contact name for the sale? Registered manager of Westridge Holdings, LLC? Lindsay Porter. My goddamn sister. That's when I realized I hadn't just been left out of the loop. I'd been stabbed in the back by every person who was supposed to protect me. My parents didn't just ignore my grandparents' will. They rewrote it with their own hands, erased me, and handed everything to the one person who couldn't hold onto a dollar without blowing it on some dumb scheme. And worse than that, they thought I'd never find out. But I had news for them. I wasn't 17 anymore. I wasn't the quiet kid who fixed fences and painted shutters and kept his head down while his sister got away with everything. I had my own money now. I had tools. And I had time. You ever feel something crack in your chest, not break exactly, but shift? Like you can't ever go back to the way things were? That's what happened in that moment. I knew one thing for sure. I was going to get that house back. And I wasn't going to do it quietly. The worst part about betrayal is that it doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people who know exactly where to cut. After I saw my sister's name on those sale documents, real estate transfer dated just 9 months after my grandfather's funeral, I knew there was no chance this had been some innocent mix-up. That house wasn't sold in desperation. It was handed over like a birthday gift to the one person who had no damn business owning it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of rye and the sound of the fridge humming behind me like some background soundtrack to a bad dream. I flipped through the scanned copies of the legal documents over and over, hoping I'd miss something. A clause, a loophole, some trace of the truth that would make this all make sense. But the truth was already printed in black and white. My name had been erased like I'd never mattered at all. The next day, I drove straight to my parents' house. They still lived in that same beige ranch they bought in the 90s, the one with the cracked driveway and plastic sunflowers hanging by the front door. I didn't even knock. I walked in like I used to when I was a kid, but this time, my hands were shaking and my jaw was clenched tight enough to crack a tooth. My mom was at the sink rinsing dishes, and Dad was in his recliner half watching a game show. They both looked up like I'd walked in wearing a ski mask. "We need to talk," I said, not bothering with a hello. My dad muted the TV and sat up, slow and heavy, while my mom wiped her hands on a towel like she was trying to stall the moment. "What's this about, honey?" she asked, too softly. I pulled the folder out of my jacket and dropped it on the coffee table. "You want to explain this?" My dad looked at the papers like he wasn't sure what they were. My mom knew right away. She sat down and sighed. The kind of sigh you make when you've been caught, not when you're sad. "It was 5 years ago," she said. "We thought you wouldn't want the house anymore. You were living out in Colorado. You seemed happy. Busy." I stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "So instead of calling me, or telling me, or honoring Grandma and Grandpa's will, you just sold it out from under me?" My dad rubbed the bridge of his nose and leaned forward. "It wasn't that simple," he said. "Your sister was in trouble." There it was. The golden phrase. The family motto. Your sister was in trouble. I asked them what kind of trouble. My mom didn't answer. My dad said she was in debt. Bad debt. She was dating this guy, real piece of work, and got herself into some deep shit. I felt my stomach turn. I already knew where this was headed, but I needed to hear it. "How much?" I asked. Dad looked down at his hands. 50,000, he said. Now look, I'm no math genius, but I said something in the heat of the moment that I'm still kicking myself over. I said, 50,000 times 20 is $1 million. That's how much you sold me out for. $1 goddamn million of betrayal. Obviously, 50,000 times 20 is actually a whole different number, but the point was, it felt that big. And I was furious. If someone caught that, good. Maybe they'll comment and tell me what it really is, because at the time, I wasn't thinking straight. My mom tried to justify it. "We couldn't let her get hurt," she said. "Those people were dangerous." She called us crying and we didn't know what else to do. So instead of calling the police, instead of facing the mess head-on, they drained my inheritance like it was their emergency fund and handed my sister the key to the only thing in this family that still had meaning. "You had no right," I said, voice trembling. "You didn't just break a rule. You broke the one promise they made to me." My dad leaned forward, and I'll never forget what he said next. "She's still your sister," he said, like that excused everything. Like being siblings gave her a blank check for life. I stood there, blinking. Yeah, I said, and I'm still your son. It was quiet after that. My mom cried. My dad stared at the carpet like it had answers. And me? I walked out of that house with a new kind of fire in my gut. I wasn't the prodigal son anymore. I was the guy they underestimated. The one they thought would stay quiet and go back to building fences and keeping the peace. But not this time. That house was mine. In spirit. In memory. In blood. And if they thought they could bury that truth with a signature and a favor to the family fuck-up, they didn't know me as well as they thought. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to get that house back. Every nail. Every brick. Every board I painted myself when I was 16 with a rusted ladder and a shaky brush. And when I did, they were going to feel what it meant to be cut out. I wasn't going to knock. I wasn't going to ask. I was going to take it back. The thing about anger is that it doesn't just sit quietly in your chest. It festers, mutates, turns every small slight into a goddamn war drum. I didn't go back to Denver after that fight with my parents. I spent the next week calling every real estate agent in town, leaving voicemails at weird hours, shaking hands with men in ill-fitting suits who smelled like desperation and cheap cologne, all in the hope of getting a whisper about my grandparents' house. People like to talk in small towns, but not when they sense something ugly at the edges, and I could tell my last name still meant something here, good or bad. Finally, after enough persistent calls and the kind of veiled threats that only work when you're truly pissed off, a realtor named Bonnie called me back with the kind of news that sets your blood boiling. She told me the house had technically been sold twice since my parents handed it off. First to the holding company, my sister's fake shell business, apparently set up with the help of some greasy lawyer friend of hers, and then, after Lindsay burned through whatever money she'd squeezed out of the first deal, to a private buyer. The trail got muddy there, but after some digging and a little bribery, I found out the real buyer was a local flipper named Jeremy Haas, a guy who specialized in buying up distressed family homes, slapping on a coat of paint, and doubling the price for some dumb city couple looking for charm. But Jeremy had gotten in over his head on this one. He'd sunk more money into repairs than he could recoup, and from what Bonnie hinted, he was desperate to unload it before his own lenders came sniffing around. I set up a meeting with Jeremy at the only coffee shop in town that didn't serve the kind of sludge you'd use to degrease an engine. He showed up late, sweat beading at his hairline, and he barely made eye contact as I offered him a price, less than what he'd hoped, but cash in hand and no questions asked. I told him I wanted the house fast. No inspection, no delay. I'll wire you the money tomorrow. He agreed before I'd finished my sentence, like a man drowning who sees a half-deflated life vest floating his way. Within 48 hours, the paperwork was signed, the wire was sent, and the old yellow colonial was mine again, at least on paper. Walking up the front steps the first time, deed in hand, I felt this sick sense of victory laced with something bitter. The porch swing was gone, probably snapped off in one of Lindsay's parties, but the grooves in the wood where it used to hang were still there. I stood on the porch for a long time, listening for echoes of my grandparents' laughter or the clatter of my childhood footsteps, but all I got was the faint sound of a TV blaring somewhere inside. That's when I realized someone was home. I used my new key, turned the lock, and stepped inside. The place smelled like cheap incense, dirty laundry, and something burnt. The walls were still the same seafoam green the first remembered, but Lindsay had covered them with tapestries and posters, band names, psychedelic prints, some inspirational bullshit about manifesting your own destiny. I found her on the couch, feet up on the coffee table, eating microwave noodles straight from the bowl, eyes glued to a rerun of some reality show. She didn't even look up when she heard the door. "If you're selling magazines, I'm broke," she called, voice as careless as ever. When she finally saw me, her face shifted through 3 different emotions: shock, guilt, and then, infuriatingly, amusement. "Well, look who crawled back," she said. I didn't respond to her jab. I held up the deed. "You're sitting on my couch, in my house, eating God knows what from my goddamn kitchen. For a second, she just stared at me, her jaw working like she was chewing over whether I was bluffing. Then she laughed, but it was hollow. You bought it back? That's rich. What, you think you're Dad's favorite now or something? There was a kind of sneer in her voice that made me want to toss her out right then and there. I told her, as calmly as I could muster, that the house was no longer hers to trash. I let her know, legally and unmistakably, that as of that morning, I owned every square inch, from the creaky attic where I used to hide after baseball games to the basement where she smoked pot and got caught by Grandma. I expected tears, maybe a tantrum, but Lindsay just rolled her eyes, like this was one more family spat she could charm her way out of. She told me, "Don't worry, I'll be out before you even have to lift a finger." But I knew my sister. She wasn't moving until she was forced, and if I let her, she'd burn the place to the ground before handing me the keys. I left her there, noodles in hand, and walked out onto the porch, the deed feeling heavier than it should have. This wasn't just about getting the house back. This was about making a point. My family had picked sides, handed over everything to the one who'd never cared about anything but herself, and left me to sweep up the ashes. That night, I sat in my truck, watching the house from across the street, and made a decision. Dad's retirement party was in 2 weeks. They'd booked the local VFW, invited everyone from church, cousins, friends, hell, even the old neighbors who used to complain about our dog. If my family wanted a show, I was going to give them one they'd never forget. Lindsay wasn't going to get a quiet exit, and no one was walking away pretending they didn't know who burned the bridge this time. I started planning her eviction for the same day as Dad's big send-off, and for the first time since I saw that for sale sign in the yard, I felt a real, bone-deep sense of satisfaction. If I had to play the villain in my own story, then damn it, I was going to be unforgettable. The thing about revenge is that it doesn't taste sweet the way they show it in movies. It's not a cool line delivered in slow motion or a dramatic walk away from a burning building. It's messy, ugly, and filled with the kind of anxiety that makes your stomach churn 3 days before it even happens. But even with the nerves, I knew exactly what I was doing. I wanted them to feel it, every single one of them. I wanted my parents to see what it looked like when the quiet one stopped playing nice. I wanted Lindsay to know that the days of being bailed out were over. And I wanted the whole damn family to be there when it happened, so no one could pretend they didn't know the truth. Planning the party took more finesse than I thought it would. I had to work with my mother without letting a single crack show in my face. She called me 3 times to confirm the decorations, like she suddenly believed I cared about centerpieces and whether or not there'd be deviled eggs. I played along, told her it would be good to see everyone again, said I'd help cover the cost since it was Dad's big day. She didn't question a thing. She was just thrilled her boys were finally talking again. The whole time, I felt like a wolf in sheep's clothing, nodding politely while rehearsing the moment in my head when I'd tear it all to pieces. The retirement party was set for a Saturday afternoon at the VFW Hall, local place with bad lighting, folding chairs, and walls lined with plaques from veterans long dead. I booked a caterer, hired a local band that played old Springsteen covers, and sent out invitations that I knew would be passed around the whole town. I even printed programs with Dad's picture on the front, big grin and all, with celebrating the career of a community legend in bold across the top. The irony practically burned a hole through the paper. But that wasn't the main event. The real moment was going to happen later that night, after everyone was drunk on cheap beer and nostalgia, when the crowd started to gather on the front lawn of the old yellow house, my house. I told them I was hosting a little after-party, that I wanted to keep the celebration going back at the place where it all began. My parents thought it was sentimental. They had no idea it was strategic. I even convinced Lindsay to come, which wasn't hard since she never turned down a chance to be the center of attention. She showed up in a tight red dress and heels too tall for the cracked sidewalk, laughing and dragging along 2 friends who looked like they'd just stepped out of a music video. She still had no idea. Not one clue. She didn't even seem suspicious when I handed her a solo cup and told her to make herself at home. "Nice of you to finally come around," she said, sipping cheap champagne like she owned the place. And for a few more minutes, she still thought she did. The lawn was packed by 7. Everyone was there, cousins I hadn't seen in years, my old coach from high school, neighbors who used to scold us for climbing their fences. The band set up near the porch, and I stood at the edge of it all, watching the house glow in the early evening light like it was waiting for the final act. Then I walked up the steps, took the mic from the band leader, and tapped it twice until the chatter died down. "Thanks, everyone, for coming out to celebrate my dad," I started, keeping my voice calm. "He gave this town a lot. He gave this family a lot." I paused, and I saw him in the crowd, arm around my mom, smiling like he was soaking in his big moment. "And this house," I continued, "was supposed to be one of those things. My grandparents built it with their hands, and they passed it on with love. Unfortunately, not everyone honored that wish." The smile froze on his face. My mother's mouth parted, her hand gripping his arm a little tighter. Lindsay was still half laughing with one of her friends until she noticed the weight in my voice. I pulled the deed from my coat pocket, unfolded it, and held it up high. "As of 2 weeks ago," I said, "this house legally belongs to me. I bought it back, every inch of it, every memory, every broken promise they thought I'd never find out about." You could have heard a pin drop. "And tonight," I went on, "I'd like to do something I should have done 5 years ago." I turned toward Lindsay, still frozen near the porch railing, her mouth open but no words coming out. I walked over, reached into the other pocket of my coat, and handed her a manila envelope. "This," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "is an official eviction notice. You've got 30 days to pack your shit and get out." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a stunned silence so thick it practically swallowed the sound of the band's instruments as they sat abandoned beside the speakers. Lindsay stared at the envelope like it might catch fire in her hands. Then she looked up at me, red-faced and trembling. "You can't be serious," she hissed. "You can't do this to me." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just said I already did. My mom let out a sound I'd never heard from her before, a choked sob that caught halfway in her throat. She turned away, hand over her mouth, and stumbled down the steps into the yard. My dad followed her, but not before glaring at me like I'd just stabbed him through the heart. He didn't say a word, just walked away into the darkening street. Lindsay stood there, fists clenched, veins in her neck pulsing like she was about to explode. "You want a war?" she shouted, voice cracking. "You're gonna get one. I'll see you in court." I didn't flinch. I just watched her storm inside, slam the door behind her, and I knew in that moment that the easy part was over. What came next wouldn't be clean or fair or even winnable. But it would be mine. All of it. And I was ready. There's a moment that always comes after you burn everything down, when the smoke starts to clear and you realize the air tastes different, not better, just unfamiliar. I stood alone in that house the morning after the party, floors still sticky from spilled drinks, silence pressing in like thick insulation. The walls that used to echo with my grandparents' voices now felt hollow, like a stage set long after the actors have left. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt cold. Not because I regretted what I did, because I didn't, but because for the first time, I wasn't sure if I'd won anything at all. The fallout came fast. My mom didn't call. Neither did Dad. I guess they figured I'd made my choice, and they weren't wrong. Lindsay moved out 4 days after the party, faster than I expected, but not without one last swing on her way out. She left the place trashed, cabinets ripped off their hinges, light bulbs smashed in the fixtures, writing on the bathroom mirror in red lipstick that read, "You're just as bad." I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out if it was meant as an insult or a confession. Maybe both. The thing is, she wasn't entirely wrong. By the time she pulled out of the driveway in that dented SUV, middle finger raised high, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a victory I didn't ask for and a grave I had to dig myself out of. People started talking. That's what small towns do when they smell blood in the water. One cousin called to say he understood why I did it, but he still wouldn't be inviting me to Thanksgiving. Another aunt sent a long email about family unity and how I should have handled it like a man of peace. The pastor from our old church stopped me in the grocery store to tell me that forgiveness was the Lord's work, not revenge. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I stopped believing in saints the same day my parents sold my birthright behind my back. I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I was interested in truth. And truth is ugly when it finally comes to light. What surprised me the most was how many people quietly approved. Guys I hadn't talked to since high school sent me texts late at night, saying they'd been through the same thing: wills rewritten, siblings favored, inheritances siphoned off under the table. One of them said, "You did what the rest of us are too scared to do." And for a while, that helped. It made me feel like less of a villain and more like some kind of accidental hero, dragging the rot into daylight for everyone to see. But as the days passed and the silence from my family grew louder, I started to feel the cracks form. I tried to fix up the house. That was the plan from the beginning, wasn't it? Scrape the old paint, sand the floors, hang the porch swing again. I bought supplies. I filled in holes. I patched drywall. But every nail I hammered felt like it was going into something rotten. Every room had ghosts now, memories not just of my childhood, but of what I'd become. The kitchen where Grandma taught me how to roll out pie dough was now just the room where Lindsay screamed at me about betrayal. The stairs I used to sit on during Christmas mornings now led to bedrooms that echoed with resentment. The house wasn't just a house anymore. It was a monument to the moment everything broke. One night, I stood in the hallway holding a framed photo of my grandparents, Earl and June, side by side in front of that very porch, smiling like nothing bad could ever touch them. I looked at their faces and asked out loud, did I do the right thing? But of course, they didn't answer. They couldn't. And even if they could, I'm not sure I'd want to hear what they'd say. I'd spent so long chasing the idea of justice that I forgot how close it can live to cruelty. Eventually, I stopped sleeping there. I'd show up during the day, work on a project or two, then drive back to a motel on the edge of town. Something about sleeping under that roof made my skin crawl. The memories were too loud, the silence too cruel. And after a while, I realized I wasn't rebuilding anything. I was haunting a place that didn't want me anymore. So I made a decision. I emptied the house out. Every tool. Every photo, every bit of furniture. I cleaned the place top to bottom, not out of pride, but out of obligation. Then I locked the front door, tucked the key into an envelope, and mailed it to myself with no return address. A reminder, maybe? A warning. I haven't been back since. People still talk. Some say I went too far. Some say I didn't go far enough. My parents haven't forgiven me. I'm not even sure they're capable of it. Lindsay? I heard she moved to Arizona, started bartending somewhere near Tucson. I don't know if she tells people about the brother who kicked her out in front of 100 people or if she's rewritten the story with herself as the victim again. Maybe that's how she sleeps at night. I wouldn't know. But me? I live small now. Quiet. I work my job, pay my bills, and keep to myself. I still think about the house, especially on cold mornings when the sun hits just right and the air smells like old wood and dust. I wonder if someone will buy it, paint over the past, raise a family inside the walls that once held mine. I hope they treat it better than we did. Was it justice? I don't know. Maybe. Was it payback? Absolutely. But in the end, it didn't bring peace. It didn't bring closure. It just cleared the board, leaving everyone holding pieces they couldn't fit back together. And maybe that's the real cost of betrayal, not just what you lose, but what you become to survive it. Some people call that justice. Others call it cruelty. I guess the truth lives somewhere in between.